Welcome to B2B Bytes, a big commerce B2B podcast specializing in manufacturing, distribution, and wholesale. Each episode, we bring you stories from B2B experts in the manufacturing and distribution space. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Michael Payne, Vice President at Silk Commerce. Silk are an SI agency working with B2B manufacturers and distributors across many different industries. They actually just won our B2B Excellence Award for their implementation of BioRad, a huge life sciences business. I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about that today and many other things. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you so much
to be here.
for joining us. Thank you
Yes.
for joining us. Maybe kick us off just by giving a little bit of your background, a bit of background about Silk and how you got into B2B e-commerce.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started at Silk right out of school. So I've been at Silk for about a decade now. Worked in a bunch of different functions, sales, did some project management. So I've seen kind of every part of the business, at least as much as I've been indoctrinated into. When it comes to Silk, I think we made a decision back in 2017 and I think every agency, it's important to make a decision like this, being where do we want to be really good? Where do we want to specialize? How do we want to be understood inside the market? And we had seen this sort of growth and concentration of focus inside the direct consumer and B2C space. Certainly not all the answers had been figured out at that point, but certainly there were a lot more questions than answers inside the B2B space. And as a consultancy, looking for opportunities to help customers, arenas where there's more questions to be answered than there are answers already established, right, is a great place to be. And so that's really where kind of our focus around B2B started. It was probably about 20% of our portfolio at that time. 2 years later, it was about 50%. Now we're about 80% of the projects we do are working with the types of businesses you mentioned, manufacturing, distribution, wholesale, right? And so, yeah, that's really been our focus for the last decade or so.
Spot where the white space is and head to the white space.
Exactly.
I like that, right? There are a lot more questions than answers right
Yes.
now, I think, in the B2B space, although we're building answers to them, which is very, very, very exciting. One area I think that's a real focus, and actually we just had a press release with you guys about this. We've been working together on a fun little project in B2B, is the B2B2C or B2B2X space. For our audience, what does that actually mean? And we'll talk about what kind of we've worked on to try and solve that solution and bring something to market to help that solution. But that is a term that is thrown around a lot, B2B2X.
I think the concept of supply chain and commerce have been very separate. And I think what we're seeing is that commerce and supply chain are actually coming together. You have, I think, a twofold phenomena happening. You have brands that have always understood that their brand held value. Most of the time, these are consumer brands because we understand them in our households. And then you have, you and I always joke all the time, like we work with the $500 million or the $1 billion manufacturer distributor that nobody's ever heard of, right?
The unsexy brand, no one knows, that is key backbone of the economy.
But they have so much opportunity to drive a digital orchestration layer with their clients.
And their clients, in this case, aren't necessarily consumers. They might be retailers, distributors,
dealers, so on and so forth, right? So we're actually seeing this both for consumer brands and B2B brands. So I'll give you a couple examples. We're working with a large consumer business, mostly focused out of Europe, and they're trying to figure out how they enter into more emerging markets where they have done some market research, but they haven't really tested their product there. They're not inside retail stores. And if you look historically, there has been a lot of overhead for a business to enter a new market. You have to establish headquarters, you have to establish human capital, you have to establish operations, you need logistics, right? So the capital investments that are required to enter into new markets are substantially less these days for a business that has invested in their core markets from a digital standpoint, right? Because all you need to do is take the digital investments that you've made and scale them to that next market, right? So in this case, we are working with a consumer brand that wants to enter into smaller markets where, aren't the size of the US or aren't the size of Canada or whatever it might be, but do have market potential. What they're doing is they're partnering up with local distribution businesses and actually giving them a branded commerce site on behalf of that brand, and allowing that distributor to effectively kind of operate certain parts of that site, but more importantly, fulfill the consumer orders that are coming in. And the strategy there is, rather than having to put all the capital intensive inputs into that new market to be able to service that market, you can actually take a very digital first entry point into these markets and partner with logistics and operation infrastructure that already exists, and do that in a very lightweight and cost effective way. And the worst case is the market doesn't work out and you've made a minimal viable investment, and it's not a bad investment. It's just you've now seen that that's not working. In the best case is that you've actually proved out the market. You actually know what types of products are selling inside that market because you're collecting data back from that. And so what we're seeing is brands that are, have struggled historically with these kind of channel conflicts of like, how do I balance selling to a consumer and how do I balance selling with a distributor? They're actually combining these strategies and saying, well, I'll actually start partnering with some of these distributor networks and allowing them to embrace and utilize my brand as they go to market in areas where they specialize really well. And what we've built is a tool that makes a brand like that do that at scale, right? So if you already have an e-commerce store and you want to replicate that to a bunch of different markets, but you want to control what that local distributor has access to, or basically establish a governance layer, it's really easy to do that. We have another example of an APAC brand actually that wanted to do something similar. They wanted to build out storefronts with their products pre-populated for dealers across different parts of Asia. And so we took their core storefront and replicated it actually 1,200 times for 1,200 distributors with pre-populated products or consumer products from that brand. And then we also built this interesting strategy where we worked with the retailers to build some promotional scenarios. We actually built a mobile app that allowed a retailer to scan their shelves and prove that they were actually by majority stocking that brand's products so that they can get further promotion and rebates at the store level. So what the brilliance of that brand was, they enabled distributors within their supply chain to provide a better digital and purchasing experience for retailers, and then incentivize and create a demand from the retail level, and we're able to establish relationships at both levels, right? So this is a really exciting tool set for us, and I think for brands that already had brand equity and want to perpetuate that downstream into their supply chain, and I think more importantly, what we're seeing is we have a bunch of brands, like the boring ones that nobody's ever heard of, actually having a brand, and particularly inside their supply chain, they have that brand, are now able to perpetuate that downstream and drive value. And this is that concept of B2B2C or B2B2X or whatever it might be, right? So we're very excited about that.
So much to unpack there. So much kind of goodness in for both the manufacturer and the distributor or retailer or whoever that might be. So sort of unpack some of that. Effectively, historically, if I want to go into a new region, or even if I'm in my current region, I might be selling through distributors. I'm going into that new region. It's capital intensive. I'm setting up large networks potentially to go direct. Today, I can go through that distributor network, but give them the tools to be able to do that digitally online. And for the brand, I get to control what that branding looks and feels like. I control their pricing, their promotions, the products that they're selling.
That's right.
That's a very, very interesting proposition. I speak to a lot of companies in the US, large manufacturers, who get frustrated because their distributors are, in their words, ruining the brand on their site. They're not adhering to brand best practice. The products aren't displayed correctly. The information isn't right. And in this case, it sounds like through this setup, through the tool, your distributed commerce hub, we're able to actually control what that site looks like and spin it up for them. So maybe kind of on the technical side, how does that process actually work? Imagine I'm that manufacturer. I want to spin up a store for, I think you said 1,200 kind of distributors. Yep. How do I go about it? What can I send down? How easy is it for me to set up that store? And what information do I get back?
The brilliance of the story is that the manufacturer, let's say the brand, has already actually made most of the investment, right? They built their storefront, they built it for their dealers or their distributors, maybe retailers are buying from them, maybe the consumers buying from them is a little less likely, right? But they've already made the investment, right? They have established their brand's well represented on that site. They have integrations to their fulfillment systems and ERPs and back office systems and PIMs and all the acronyms that are out there, right?
The TLAs,
yeah,
we got
exactly.
all of them covered.
And so it's really just about saying, hey, like if you could extend that into your partners downstream from you and push your products and push the front end and push promotions. And I think most importantly, feel comfortable that you can, for a lot of distributors, maybe they're not as technically savvy, and that's not picking on distributors. It's just, part of what we do is we're trying to make organizations that have been historically offline more digitally native, right? And that's a real initiative of ours. So we are able to kind of provide more plug and play utility for storefronts for distributors in a way that the distributor doesn't all of a sudden have this massive overhead of managing the store. Actually, the brand takes on that responsibility. Now, the brand can give the distributor some opportunities to change things or to
put some of their flavor
put some
into
content
that side,
or some of their flavor or whatever it might be, right? And then when you take it to like more of a global context, particularly in emerging markets, they may not be as digital first as you may see in Europe or you may see in US, right? And so the offering of going to them and saying, hey, we're going to provide you a fully integrated e-commerce stack, fully branded products in there, pricing in there, fulfillment set up, you don't have to worry about it, is A, they're probably 5 or 6 years behind a lot of, markets that we live in, right? And B, it's like we're basically effectively providing that investment for them already, right? But these are investments that are already happening in markets where these things are working. So now we're just deploying them into markets that have net new growth opportunities.
Yeah, I like that. And it's interesting. This has sort of been a trend, I think, over the past 5 years in manufacturing and distribution of this kind of idea of B2B2X.
Yeah.
I think folks have solved it in different ways, but the solution that you guys have built and that is in market today for customers who are doing this, 1,200 plus stores, and I think you could scale that to thousands and tens of thousands of stores, is a really nice solution to help those manufacturers keep that brand, but also to allow their distributors to scale the businesses in ways that they haven't been able to do historically, whether that's because they just don't know how, they don't have the expertise. Here's an e-commerce store in a box. By the way, it's got the branding on it, it's got the content, it's got the products. And as a manufacturer there, do I get the information back about the orders? Can I see the sort of trend so I can start to learn from what my distributors are
Probably
in market?
Data is gold, right? Content's gold. All these things are gold, right? So yes, I mean, that's a key thing is they're able to, when historically what's happening inside a manufacturer's downstream distribution networks, they didn't have visibility into what was selling or who was buying it or why they were buying it, maybe even demographic data. They're now able to start collecting that. And that's often part of a negotiation between the manufacturer and the distributor to say, hey, we'll provide you the full tech stack. You don't need to make the investment there, right? You're an excellent customer of ours. And so we're going to make the kind of grow together story really easier for you from a digital first standpoint. As a function of that, we definitely want to collect some data, right? And I actually think this has been an interesting feud between the manufacturers and distributors, where distributors may feel that end buyer is their customer and it's not the manufacturer's customer, right? But we're actually seeing some of that friction get removed because now it's more of a technology partnership and it's more of a digital partnership rather than it just being a commercial one, right?
Yeah. And mutually beneficial,
Exactly.
Whereas previously it felt like a manufacturer coming and demanding the information about who is your buyer, what are they buying, I want the information. Well, now I'm helping you attract more of those buyers. I'm helping you grow through this distributed commerce that I'm giving you access to.
And if you're a brand that's figured out the ease of doing business, then like that should be a scalable concept that you can introduce to your supply chain, right? And a lot of brands struggle to figure out that story for them, right? But if you've built an excellent digital strategy and orchestration layer for the relationship with your clients, you may as well push that downstream, right? Because it's clearly working upstream.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And we actually announced that
today,
Distributed Commerce Hub today. We're here B2B Online. So that was a really exciting announcement. But yesterday, we also announced that Silk were awarded our B2B E-commerce Excellence Award for your work with Bio-Rad. For those who aren't familiar with Bio-Rad, they're a life sciences company, a very large life sciences company. It'd be great to kind of talk a little bit about that project, your approach to it. Maybe just give us a little bit of an introduction to the project itself, what what as a business they were trying to achieve, and how you kind of drove success for them, what that criteria was.
Look, they came from the classic legacy platform. We put enough into this. We're kind of squeezed into a box, and like we'd love to have digital be part of our growth story moving forward. But everywhere we look, it's custom. When we build something over here, it breaks something over there. The antiquation at that point is even hard to hire developers for, who's building on these platforms anymore, right?
It is incredible the number of businesses.
Yeah. And so they were on IBM Sterling with SAP and the crazy microservice infrastructure, actually a lot of which we were able to maintain. And so if we were to simplify the project as a lift and shift, it was moving from IBM Sterling, which is kind of an old school but quite enterprise. My guess is for Bio-Rad, the IBM Sterling really didn't have much remnants of IBM Sterling anymore. By the time they were done with it for 15 or 20 years, it was just their own product, right? What that meant was that it was very human capital intensive. It was very developer intensive. Marketers didn't feel like they can drive their strategy and initiative through it without needing developers as part of that motion, right? Which is a huge thing that we focus on as I think that's what modern e-commerce is asking for, is this compartmentalization from marketing being able to do their job and developers being able to do their job and sales being able to do their job.
As marketing, I don't want to have to go and say,
exactly.
I'm running a new promotion, I've got a new product. Can you get that on the site? Developer comes back and says, yeah, I'll have that done in 2 months.
Right.
No, not acceptable anymore.
Right. And these are also the types of businesses that historically a lot of SaaS companies have been worried, are we able to actually capture this type of customer given how custom they are and how advanced they are, right? Because from a digital maturity standpoint, they were very kind of high up the curve, right? And so it was a huge indicator for me that BigCommerce was in a place not only as an enterprise platform, but also as a B2B enterprise platform to support a business like that, right? Excellent APIs, excellent, functionality under the hood, right? But also, I think Bio-Rad came into this project understanding there are aspects of our project that probably no platform can support, right? And so we want to invest into scalability. We want to invest into predictability. We want to invest into, platforms that will be here for a very long time, right? And take advantage of much of the out-of-the-box functionalities you can. But if we do have nuanced custom aspects to our business, I'll give you some examples, then we can build those outside of that and have that work with BigCommerce. And so the end result at a very high level from a technical standpoint is we had a highly composable, highly microservice first deployment with headless and CMS that was separate, right? And has driven enormous growth. I think something like 50 or 60% revenue growth in the first year.
Incredible.
I think something like 40 or 50% attraction on their customers relative to the year prior to that, right? And so, they're also a global business, which is a big topic these days, is how do global businesses execute really well in the digital space, let alone the e-commerce space, right? So just some numbers, they're in 140 countries. They offer 32 languages, and they have, I think, 10 currencies, right? So if you did the N times N times N on that, there's like 45,000 permutations of how that site can get deployed, right? Now, not every country had every language, not every country had every currency, right? So that's an inflated number. But just to give you kind of some of the scale, they also had 150,000 SKUs.
So big catalog, lots of currencies, lots of countries you're selling into. And I imagine part of the difficulty is, how do you keep a consistent experience across all of that?
That's right. And actually, depending on the country, it was inconsistent. And that was part of the challenge, right? So if you're, they're in the bio and life science world. So they'll sell everything from an immunoassay, sort of fully configurable. If you want to build a COVID-19 test, you can, to, lab equipment and, gauze or something, or pipettes or whatever you might want, right? So they're both a manufacturer and distributor. So the simple products were really simple, but the complex products were highly configurable and more advanced, right? So depending on the country, we had all these different variables we had to look at, right? Not only the basics of localization being language or currency or culture plays a role. So like what content or how are we communicating to it? But also depending on the country, tend to be different buyers. So in certain countries, it was mostly like large scale distribution purchasing, right? Let's say in some areas of APAC, right? But in other parts of let's say Europe, where there was more investment into research going on, they were actually interacting directly with laboratories and researchers. And so they were the ones that were configuring the assays. They were the ones, actually Bio-Rad put vending machines inside of these laboratories.
Wow.
That allowed them to make a purchase from that vending machine, and that fully integrated into our e-commerce site. And it actually guaranteed that the product that they purchased was part of the same lot and batch of the previous products they've been working on for this research that they've been working on, so that they had continuity in the products and quality that they were working on, right? So just like one of the many dimensions of doing that. But when you lay it all out, you have millions of different scenarios that you have to take into consideration, and it goes just beyond language, right? Certain countries couldn't purchase certain products because of compliance or legal reasons, regulatory reasons, right? Even certain customers in certain countries were allowed to purchase certain products or maybe weren't, right? So one of the things we did is we built this table of microservices that basically, when a user logged in, it said, who are you? Are you a researcher? Are you a distributor, right? Therefore, what products do you have access to? Where are the compliance considerations to? Imagine just this big system that flags things on and off, right? And at the time of the login, it basically personalized the whole experience based on what products they generally purchase or can or cannot purchase. It actually created it incentivized them to go down certain corridors. So if you're a researcher, you can actually, it would kind of upfront allow you to go to the configurator, versus if you're a distributor, you want to go buy in bulk, right? So this was, I don't think Silk can take a whole lot of credit for this. The big thing about Bio-Rad is they really, really understood their customer. And it's one thing to understand your customer in one market. It's a whole different thing to understand your customer across 140 countries, right? And I really testament to them to taking the investment in understanding who are the different buyer personas, who are the different archetypes, what are the nuances of each region, and how do all those things come together in a way that we have to personalize to that individual based on where they're at or what their needs are.
Yeah, and I think we often see large companies like that approaching digital transformation without understanding the customer journey in the detail that's required like that. And the fact that you're then able to build those microservices, plug them into the front end, BigCommerce powering that back end, to be able to create a holistic experience for each segment, each cohort of that buyer, such that one, they get what they need, very important, and two, you're pushing them down the avenues that you know are going to lead to conversion. Now, you mentioned some of the results there, which have been truly fantastic.
Yep.
That's what you want, right? And I assume now, as you kind of look forward, that's about growth for them and being able to drive better conversion, better revenue, bringing more of those customers online. And at the end of the day, that's freeing up time for the sales team. That's helping them to power that growth. I'm curious, as you look at that project, were there any things that were sort of surprising you didn't necessarily expect, or sort of the lessons learned of, oh, that wasn't interesting, we hadn't considered that? For people who are listening and who are maybe thinking about how do we grow globally through a digital channel, I'm curious.
I would say, I guess there's the answer of how we built a good relationship with Bio-Rad to execute. I mean, this was a really hard project. I mean, I probably shouldn't be admitting this, but 2 or 3 months into the project, my COO came to me and was like, I'm not sure we can do this. We eventually pulled it off, right? With some creativity. But the challenges were real. I think what really allowed us to be successful, I've explained a lot of the challenges of this project. I think several months into the project, Silk was really an extension of Bio-Rad as a business. I mean, we had Bio-Rad email addresses, we had employee IDs, we spent multiple weeks on site with them. I mean, it was a very, very embedded process. And when we're looking at a project of that scale, this is one of the things that we talk to particularly the executive stakeholders or the program managers about really early on, is if our team is not really an extension of yours, then it's hard to create alignment. It's hard to set the right goals. It's hard to have the same North Star. And they actually feel like us on our end feel like we're really building something with that client, building not just a project with billable hours and consulting time, but a product.
Partners in success.
Right. Partners in success. Right. I think the other thing that was really interesting to me was when you're the scale of Bio-Rad, further globalization means further growth for them. And so getting a really strong foundation in architecture on BigCommerce so that they can go to the next country. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing both for consumer brands and for business to business companies is they're actually being digital first when they're entering a new market. And I kind of talked about this. So I earlier talked about this in the context of a consumer brand. But we're seeing the exact same thing. Like, I don't think there's any difference between a consumer brand and a business brand in this concept, which is if you're going to go to market in a new region, you may as well take the customer experience success you've had in other regions, embrace the nuances of the newer region with market research and analysis or whatever it might be, make the tweaks that you need to make, but be digital first in that arena. So what we talked a lot about with Bio-Rad was we don't want to go live with some system that just works for us today. We want to go live with a system that we know can scale and isn't this exponentially high cost to add that new market or add that new country or service that new type of buyer persona, right? So I think, we wanted to get the project done. We had deadlines, we had timelines. But most importantly, we wanted to make a scalable long-term solution for them. And that was part of every single discussion, every type of architectural decision we made.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that's kind of exactly what we're seeing in the market today. When we talk to those larger enterprise manufacturers, distributors, how are we going to grow at scale without incurring significant cost as we try to do that? I don't want it to cost 6 months of dev time and $500,000 if I want to expand into Asia. That's not acceptable anymore. That needs to be a few weeks and a few tens of thousands of dollars. It should be an easy extension. And I think this is a great example of being able to deliver on that successfully. So hats off to Silk, and obviously hats off to the Bio-Rad team for delivering on that as well. Yep. It's a fantastic success case. We're kind of coming up to the end of our chat here. As you look to the future, I mean, you're talking to lots of manufacturers and distributors every single day. What are the things that are hot button topics for them at the moment? What are they really thinking about as they're thinking about how do we grow? How do we stay ahead of the curve? I think if I look back a year ago, everyone was talking about how do we build B2C experiences for B2B. I kind of hate that term, but I'm curious today, when you're in discussions with these large manufacturers and distributors, what are the hot button topics? As you look to the future, what are the things that you think are going to drive success?
I think a B2B business is in such a better position to service their customers than the average direct-to-consumer business. I mean, the average B2C business, they're like top of the funnel traffic, bottom of the funnel conversion rates.
I saw a Google ad. I wanted some sneakers. I bought the sneaker. Now I'm gone.
Yeah, and it's like if you can get the second order, that's awesome. You get and there's some stats around like if you get the third or fourth order, then you have like a lifetime customer, and that's great, right? But then there's remarketing that goes into it. But you and I were kind of talking about this yesterday. It's like with a B2B business, you have 10, 15, 20 years of history, right? And I think we're kind of coming out of this stage where a lot of manufacturing distributors kind of made the table stakes level investment. They checked the box. They're on some platform that didn't scale. Maybe it was the cost efficient option or whatever it might be. And these are the types of companies we're talking to every day. And the first kind of variable that we're discussing with our customers is help me understand your customers and what you've learned from the experiences that you've already implemented in terms of your digital strategy. Maybe you don't have one, but also like, what do you know about them just for having known them for 10 or 15 years? Because not only do you have the ability to personalize an experience, but you almost have the obligation to do that, right? Because you have so much more information than the typical consumer brand to be able to execute on that, right? So we're spending a lot more time with our clients, kind of segmenting out their customers, And this goes for both mature and maybe immature digital businesses, right? I mean, if you're talking to maybe a company that is their first time going online, they may have 10 customer segments and one of them does 50% of the revenue. Maybe that one actually isn't the best one to go after. Maybe it's like there's 2 or 3 of them that the types of products that they buy from you are better for e-commerce, or a little bit simpler. They're not as configurable. They're not as advanced. Maybe they're implicitly younger in generation, and so therefore they're going to adopt e-commerce a little bit better, right? And then for the more mature ones, we're saying, look, you've been online for the last 5 or 6 years. Like, what is the data telling us that's working and what's not working? And how can we, given the offline relationships you've had with your customers, merge that with the digital data that we're collecting from their behaviors and kind of 1 + 1 = 3, that information into a much, much better strategy, right? And so I think we've talked about personalization in the context of B2C, but like personalization in B2C has its implicit limitations, right? Like you're only ever working off of a certain amount of data, and usually that data is pretty small. Yeah, it can be real time, and it can be based on what you just clicked on last, but it's based on information that's collected over a 5-minute period, right?
Yeah.
Versus information that's collected over a 5-year period, and that really should be executed on really effectively. So we're trying to sit down with marketing teams, with customer service teams, with sales teams, some of which may be a little bit reluctant on e-commerce, but I think that view is changing.
I think it's channel conflict.
Exactly.
I think we're getting past that.
Yeah, I think we're getting past it, but and actually saying, okay, help me understand your customer and look at digital as a way to improve your job and improve how you deliver that job to your customer, rather than something that's replacing you. But more importantly, like, help me understand your customer, and let's reverse engineer this project and the KPIs of how we measure success for that project based on that, versus how much revenue did we generate in the first year, right? Because if you can get those first things right, then the revenue will take care of itself, right? Or the adoption will take care of itself. So I think being very, very customer centric is something that I'm trying to perpetuate inside of organization every single day.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. We all think about personalization for B2C, but the truth is you don't have that much data on those consumers because you haven't necessarily known them for that long. You don't have a 5-year relationship. In B2B, they've been ordering with you for 5, 10, 15 years. You know when they order, what they order, how frequently they do. If you can get them into that digital experience and push them down a journey like we were talking about for buyer ad, that you know is servicing the products they need at the time they need them, well, they're going to enjoy that experience more. As that experience improves, NPS starts to go up, that improves share of wallet, hence growth within your customer base. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you can start to find lookalikes, right? I know this customer shopped in this way, who looks like that? And I can service them with the same experience the minute they hit my store.
Yes.
Because here we're talking about B2B, they're all logged in. They all had to register. You know who the businesses are. You know who the buyers are. And so you can really tailor that experience. I think that's a great point. I think personalization is going to really change B2B in a way that I don't think people have quite appreciated yet, because everyone's been so focused on B2C. But we're going to start to see that segmentation really change the experience. I think,
but they have everything they need to do it. It's just execution at that point, right?
Just execution and a good partner.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael, this was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for joining me on B2B Bytes today. Maybe we'll have to come back and do one just on personalization.
I think that sounds like a great idea. Thank you for having me.